If you've ever set up a camera on public land only to come back and find out that it was stolen, you know how much it sucks. These cameras are not cheap. Even the batteries are getting expensive these days, but it's the intel that these cameras provide that hurts so much when you're missing it after one of these cameras gets stolen. So in this video, I'm gonna walk through what I do to prevent my cameras from getting stolen. And in the 10 or 15 years I've been running cameras on public land in several different states, I can only think of 2 cameras that have been stolen, doing exactly what I'm gonna outline here today. And I'll add some things that I do every time, as well as some optional things just to further prevent people from stealing your cameras. Make sure you're protecting your investment and protecting your intel. So the first thing you want to do to avoid people from stealing your cameras is avoid the super obvious areas. I always laugh when I see cameras at chest level on the main access trail or right on that lush bean field that you can walk to really quickly from the parking lot. Those cameras are just begging to get stolen. And a lot of times I just assume that these are beginners because they're right at ground level, they're unlocked, and usually the tag end of the camera strap is blowing around in the wind, probably triggering the camera, gonna drain their batteries in less than a week. So the first thing I do is I just try to avoid those places altogether. There are times and situations where maybe you wanna monitor how many people are accessing a specific piece of public land. And sometimes there are some great overlooked spots that are frequented by bucks that may be in close proximity to parking areas or people trails. So I'm not saying never do this, but just understand that by putting your camera in an area that has increased people traffic, you have an increased likelihood of having somebody mess with your cameras. So if you can avoid it, go a little bit deeper, get off the main drag a little bit, and avoid those super obvious places unless you're willing to risk that somebody finds, potentially messes with your camera. But if you're running cameras on public land, I will say it's just part of the price of playing the game. You're paying money if you're gonna lease private ground. The price of public land hunting sometimes is some lost cameras, but if you do the rest of the things that I outlined in this video, you're gonna minimize the chances of somebody stealing or messing with one of your cameras. When you do find an area that you wanna have a camera, there's 2 things that I always do every single time on public land and oftentimes even on private land. But the first thing that I do is always carry a climbing stick so I can hang my cameras 8, 10, even 12 feet off of the ground. I'm 6'4", I have an 8-foot reach, so if I can get above that, out of the range of somebody could just open the door, steal your SD card, or just steal the camera altogether. And it's also less likely that people and deer are gonna spot it because it's outside of the normal field of view. It's up. So unless they're kind of scanning up on the trees, if they're familiar with people running cameras higher, there's a good chance a lot of people will miss those cameras altogether. But the other thing that I do is I lock all of my cameras on public land. The cost of these locks does add up, but what I do is I order these Python locks. You can get them in like 10 or 12 packs, and they're all keyed alike. So that way all 12 locks have the same keys instead of trying to sort through 20 different keys to try to figure out which one opens what lock. And I run a few different types of locks. The Python locks are pretty nice because you can tighten them to basically an unlimited number of tightnesses depending on the size of the tree. Just to illustrate how a Python lock works, it looks like a python. As you can see, it kind of has a snake head on it, but you just take one end of the cable, stick it through there, and then however tight you put it in there, it's locked now. So however big the tree is, I mean, that's taut right there. And then it just has a key, turn the key, and you're able to undo that. Python lock's super handy. I'll link to the ones that I use that are all keyed alike. This isn't unique to me. I'm not the only person that does this. Most people that I know that run a lot of cameras use Python locks, so check them out. But if you hang them high and use a Python lock, those 2 things alone, along with avoiding some of the more obvious areas, those things alone are gonna eliminate 95% of people from stealing your cameras. The only 2 cameras I've ever had stolen on public land, one of them was one of the few cameras I've ever had at ground level, so I was just asking for it. It was in a pretty easy to access area. And then the other one was in a very obvious area, and somebody actually shot it out of the tree with a shotgun. They shot my strap and my lock so the camera would fall to the ground, and they stole my camera. And that was a huge bummer because I soaked that camera on this apple tree all year, and I was super excited to see what I got on. But again, by doing those 3 things, hanging it high, locking it up, and keeping it off of the main drag, you're gonna have a lot better chance of your cameras actually being there when you get back. Now I will say, when you do start hanging your cameras up high using a climbing stick, it does take a little bit of practice to figure out how to get the angle right. You have to point it down, and you can use a stick for that obviously, but sometimes it takes messing around with some different size sticks to get to exactly the right angle. I would definitely, if it's an SD camera, I would have a card reader so you can set up your camera, trigger it, and then check the SD card and make sure sure it's aimed where you want it. Or if it's a cell camera like this Moultrie Edge 2 Pro, it has live aim Bluetooth connectivity, so that way you can connect to your phone, and I can adjust this while looking at my phone, seeing exactly what the camera is seeing to make sure that it's aimed properly. It saves a ton of time, ton of headaches, but whatever you do, take the time to make sure that your camera is aimed properly, because there's nothing worse than thinking you have it pointed down enough, only to realize that all the deer walking in front of your camera aren't even triggering it, or if you're just getting the tops of their backs, or the opposite, pointed way too far down, you're missing a large field of view that you otherwise could be getting. So take the time to really make sure that you understand where your camera is pointing, make sure it's pointed exactly where you want it. So getting into more of the optional things, and I always do those first three things. I avoid the obvious places, I hang my cameras high, and I always lock them. Right there, if you just do those three things, forget about the rest of this video, you're gonna be just fine. But if you wanna take it another step further, there's a couple different things you can do. One of which I talked about in the video I just most recently posted, and that's camouflaging your cameras. And some cameras come camouflage, some like these Moultries just come solid brown or solid tan. You can paint those, break up their outline a little bit more, like this one that I have. And what I did there is I basically just took some paper towels, put a little paint on them, and kind of dabbed it all around, did a bunch of different browns and tans and some blacks to add depth and break up the outline, compared to like this Edge 2 Pro. It's just a solid color, although on this tree it blends in probably better than the camo one. And then the other thing that I've done is, instead of the strap, which is oftentimes a dead giveaway, a lot of times the strap is the thing that people notice, because if you're on the back side of the tree or on the profile of the tree, that strap, that horizontal line, is what people notice first. What I've done occasionally, I don't do it all the time, is using paracord. So you can use paracord. It eliminates having that big thick strap wrapped around the tree. It's a lot lower profile. And I've also seen people do like baling wire, and the baling wire probably works twofold. One, just having a lower profile, and you can also crimp it, and that can be your lock or your theft deterrent. But I buy this camo paracord. I use it for my mock scrapes too, hanging vines a lot of times if I don't use a zip tie. But I'll show it from the front, and you can just see the difference in how easy it is to spot one of these cameras versus the other. And again, with this tree, the bark color, actually, the tan camera might actually blend in a little bit better, but you can definitely start to see how the strap would be something that you would notice if you're walking through the woods. From the side, and again, this is a very smooth bark tree, but the bottom camera has a lot less going on securing it to the tree. The top one has a lot of strap wound up, and that's gonna be really easy for somebody to notice. And from the front, the Edge 2 Pro is just a solid color. It actually blends in really well with this tree, but you can see this other one has a little bit more depth to it. One thing I should talk about is when you do use the Python lock, obviously that adds more for somebody to notice. There's multiple different thicknesses as far as different Python locks you can get. The thinner ones are honestly easier to pack, and again, they're gonna keep an honest thief honest. Bolt cutters are gonna cut even the thicker ones, but I think it's a little less noticeable, and you even might wanna come in with spray paint prior to season and spray paint these cable locks with some like drab matte color. That way they blend in a little bit better. Again, even if you just stick to these straps, which I do most of the time, it's just easier. They come with the cameras. I have a lot of them. I do that just to keep things simple. And as long as you lock them up, hang them high, you're gonna be just fine. So when you do hang your cameras up high, and again, I would do this on top of my climbing stick, 10, 12 feet up, just to get it out of reach and out of sight. But you're gonna have to use a stick or something to aim it down, and you might have to get a really thick stick depending on how high it is. But I basically wedge it behind the camera, tighten that strap down, and as you can see, it's starting to angle down a little bit. But again, when you're 12 feet up, you really have to aim that sucker down. So another thing that I've found that's been super handy, especially with these Moultries, is these little aiming brackets, and they're super simple. You actually just strap the bracket to the tree, just like you would if it was directly onto the camera, and you could probably even run this with paracord. And what this allows you to do is slide the camera directly onto there. So right now you can see the camera's kind of pointing more or less straight at the camera, but what I can do using this bracket is start angling it way down without having to look for a different size stick or without risking the stick falling out if I accidentally loosen the strap a little bit. So with these brackets, you can do a lot of adjustability. Right now it's kind of pointing almost up even, but that's what it looks like from the side. And then the other thing that I really like about these brackets is if I need to take the camera off, change batteries, and I know I have it angled exactly how I want it, I don't want to mess that up. So I can leave the bracket on the tree, pop open the thing, change the batteries, drop it right back on there. And once it's on here, now I put my Python lock around it, make sure it's locked up and secured. But it's another trick that I really like using when hanging my cameras up high. Once I do decide on a camera location and hang my camera, the last thing that I'm gonna do is drop a waypoint on OnX and actually take a picture and save it into the waypoint of where exactly that camera is on the tree. So that way if you come back and it's been a while, you can't find the camera, maybe the GPS drifted a little bit and your pin is not quite in the right spot, or maybe somebody did steal your camera. But if you have a picture of the tree, exactly where that camera was mounted on the tree, saves you a ton of time. You can pull it up and be like, oh man, my camera should be right there and it's gone, so somebody stole it. Or it can help you find the camera. The other thing that I've been thinking about is I think that people are more afraid of stealing cell cameras. A lot of them are GPS enabled, like these Moultries. I think sometimes people are afraid that their picture is already taken and sent to the person, so they're afraid to mess with your camera. So generally, I think it's safer to run cell cameras. You're gonna have less chance of people stealing them if they are in fact a cell camera versus an SD camera. But the last thing that I wanted to talk about, probably the best thing to keep people from stealing your cameras is to not mess with other people's cameras. If you're going in an area and you're finding cameras and you're messing with them and you're taking the SD cards, you're stealing the cameras altogether, what do you think that person's gonna do when they go in there to realize that their camera has been stolen? They're gonna come across your camera, assume that it was you, and they're gonna yank your camera or mess with it, break your camera. So it's kind of the golden rule. If you don't want people to mess with your stuff, don't mess with theirs. A lot of times when I'm scouting public land and I do come across someone's camera, I'll actually walk in front of it and wave to them to acknowledge like, hey, I've seen your camera. I did not steal it. I did not mess with it. So that way, please, if you find mine, don't mess with my camera. And I think that goodwill goes a long ways. Obviously, there's a lot of people with sticky fingers and people are just so curious to know what's on someone else's camera. And then the last thing that I'll end with is these Moultries have built-in memory. They don't even use SD cards anymore. So I like the fact that if somebody did find my camera, take bolt cutters, cut off the lock, climbing stick, climb up there, they're not gonna be able to go through the SD card and get all of that valuable intel that I've been collecting on those cameras. So I think that just further discourages people from stealing the cameras. So to recap everything, I always avoid the obvious areas. I hang my cameras high, I lock them up. Sometimes I'll camouflage them, sometimes go for a lower profile cable or cord. But if you do some of these things, you're gonna protect your investment, protect your camera, and more importantly, the intel that you're trying to gather is actually gonna be there when you get back to check your cameras. Or if it's a cell camera, your intel is gonna continue to flow to you. Somebody's not gonna steal your camera. If you guys have additional tips on how to avoid people from stealing your cameras on both public and private land, share those down below in the comments. I'd love to hear those tips. If you guys are still watching at this point, please hit that thumbs up button. It helps me out a ton, doesn't cost you a thing. And make sure you subscribe to the Next Step Outdoors YouTube channel. But thank you guys for watching and I will see you in the next video.